In the early morning hours of November the 27th, 1884, 30 miles south of Golden, in the area of Baird's Creek, three men were riding along. They were, in order, Robert Baird and Henry Myers, who were returning to Missoula, Montana, to the Eddie Hammond and Company, who they worked for. These two men had carried with them into Canada earlier in the year a long pack train of supplies, mostly alcohol, for the Eddie Hammond and Company. They were bringing it to our area for the consumption of the Canadian Pacific Railway workers who were working through the mountains at that point in history. On their return, they hired and brought with them Manuel Daynard, a local packer who knew the area quite well, and he was there to help them with their safety. As they were creeping along on the old Kootenai Trail, a shot rang out from the hill above them. It instantly killed Robert Baird, and he fell from his horse. The second shot caught Henry Myers in the hip, and he fell from his horse and was dazed. Manuel Daynard managed to reel his horse around, and he headed back to Hog Ranch for help. Hog Ranch is today's Parson, and a large hotel was there that accommodated the alcohol and the CP rail workers that came to Hog Ranch to partake in the libations that they were being offered there. Once at Hog Ranch, they formed a small posse, and they headed back to the scene of the crime. They found Henry Myers just starting to gain consciousness. Baird lay a short distance away as deceased. It was clear that the outlaw who had shot the pair of them had made away with the cash and the gold, as the saddlebags that had contained them had been cut open and the money was gone. Over the next few months, this outlaw, who was quite well known in the area as being a loud-mouthed Irishman from the United States, he was seen at various locations in the valley, including Golden, within 48 hours of the crime. But word traveled quite slowly at that point in time, so he managed to just elude the police at every avenue, and at this point in time, he got away from Golden. He went to Donald. He went from Donald, where he spent a few days, on over heading towards Farewell. Probably in the area of Beaver Creek, he spent the night in a tent with a couple of officers, a couple of Northwest Mounted Police members who didn't know who he was. Things started to heat up for him, however, and he started to make his way east and was soon seen in Silver City, and then he was seen in Laguna, present-day Lake Louise. He managed to elude the police there, however, and made his way to Winnipeg, Manitoba, a place he was familiar with, having been there before in the past. The Bulldog Kelly character was just that. He was quite a character. He loved fast women, he loved gambling, and he loved alcohol. And he could often be seen just gambling away every cent that he had. This fellow, as the train neared Winnipeg, he was spotted by a couple of officers of the Northwest Mounted Police Company, and he jumped off the train and ran away from them while the train was still moving. He was next seen in the United States. Two officers from Canada followed him there, and they managed to apprehend him, and they turned him over to the local authorities, demanding that he be extradited back to Canada. Now, Canada had an extradition agreement with the United States, so it seemed like it would be quite an easy thing to have happen, but that was not to be the case. The province of British Columbia rounded up a bunch of witnesses and a bunch of lawmen, and they sent them down to St. Paul, Minnesota, where the hearing was being held to determine whether or not he would be extradited back to Canada. And The American government in that day, in that time, was not at all happy to be sending an American citizen back to Canada, which was ruled by the Brits at that point in time, to see him hang, regardless of the fact that he had indeed killed an American citizen on Canadian soil. So after a great deal of money was spent, the extradition order was overturned and he was released. Within a few days, however, we came up with some new witnesses from British Columbia. We sent them to St. Paul, and he was rearrested. He was being held again, and he was held for several months by the time we finally got all of our information together. However, again, the Americans were not about to turn an American citizen over to British rule here in Canada, and he was released in 1886. He went to work after that for the Northwest Pacific Railway Company out of Missoula, Montana at that point in time. He worked with the company for a couple of years, and just before he was getting ready to leave the employ of the company, he told one of his fellow workers that upon leaving, he was going to head back to Canada where he had a nice little nest egg put away. Well, 2 days or 3 days before he was due to leave, he was pulling himself onto a train. His hand slipped and he fell under the train. The accident severed his arm and his leg, and he was unable to recover. He passed away in the hospital of the Northwest Pacific Company. But the story doesn't end there, because where did the money go? That's a question that we continue to pursue here at the Golden Museum. We hope that you'll stay tuned as we develop this story further, and we hope that this little video piques your interests and has you asking questions.